Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole, featuring the voices of Jim Sturgis, Abby Cornish, Ryan Quanten, Jeffrey Rush, Hugo Weaving, and Helen Mirren, directed by Zack Snyder. Now, before I get into this, I have seen this movie before, but it's been since theaters. I remember having a hard time with it because of who the characters are, and I think it's going to be the same with this review, but let's see if it still remains. Let's get into this movie. We open with a flying owl as he captures a mouse and goes to his family along with son Soren, voiced by Jim Sturgis from 21, Clud, voiced by Ryan Quanten, and youngest Anglantine, I don't know if I said that name wrong, please forgive me, as they tell stories of the Guardians while Clud is tired of those stories, and Soren and Eglantine, I think that's how you say it, Eglantine. Let me see if, I said it wrong the first time, my fault. Loving them so much as they learn to hunt, and the owl parents go hunting for food while their assistant, who happens to be a snake named, let me see if I'm saying this name right, Mrs. Plithiver? I don't know if I said it right, please forgive me. And no matter what I think of this movie, the animation in this thing is stunning to look at as Soren and Clud get to the ground, and they can't fly yet, so they're in the danger spot, and they get captured by a couple of owls who can fly, who talk a tad too much. And as they arrive to a dangerous spot, which happens to be the kingdom of Metalbeak, voiced by Joel Egerton, and Nira, voiced by Helen Mirren. Meanwhile, Soren and meets Gylfi, who will end up as the side character, as these characters are, in my honest opinion, are a little pretentious. Soren and Gylfi get picked as pickers, while Clud is becoming a soldier of theirs, and I sometimes can't tell which owls are who. I didn't even put that together, as it might be a joke, but as director Zack Snyder does a similar character look-alike on some of the owls here, and that gave me a hard time understanding who they are. Nira gets Clud and other owls to fly higher, while Soren and Gylfi volunteers as a rock, and I'm having a real hard time understanding what is happening while I'm 23 minutes into the movie. Soren and Gylfi meet an owl who teaches them how to fly, and we kind of met him earlier, and what is his name? Grimble, who's voiced by Hugo Weaving. As the movie does a bad job at telling the characters' names, Clud catches a little blue bird and becomes a soldier of Nira, while she comes in catching Grimble. Wait, what was his name again? Yeah, Grimble. As he lets Soren and Gylfi wanting Clud to go with them, as they're stalling time, and Clud decides he would rather be a soldier, and Grimble is killed, and Soren and Gylfi fly away without Clud, and Nira going, while they go after him, with Nira going after them, and Soren and Gylfi escape, and these scenes are dreadful. And I'm having a hard time understanding this plot. Like, I'm having a hard time talking about this movie. Soren and Gylfi go to the Owls of Ga'Hoole, while Clud brings Eglantine, and Soren and Gylfi finding Digger, as he's a joke maker, kind of an owl, and is very annoying. And Twilight, who's another owl who seems like a little mature, but he sings those dreadful songs, I'll say. Well, not dreadful, but he sounds dreadful at singing, I'll say. And they see Mrs. Plithiver, something like that. I don't know how you say that name anymore. And joins them to rest up with Digger and Twilight, and they eventually go to Ga'Hoole, as Clud brings the sister, aka Eglantine, into this monstrosity that is Nira's army, as she goes to her husband Metalbeak, who's not a good villain in this movie, like I brought up before. While they go to Ga'Hoole, Digger tells a bad joke of knock knock with owls who, and I'll explain that at the end. While Twilight is a bad singer, and they get attacked by crows and get to an island where they are near Ga'Hoole, and they fly in the ice cold and are almost killed until they get to Ga'Hoole, as the writing was bad. Their acting is terrible, and the plot is hard to follow at times. they get to Cahul, and they find the Guardians and go to a meeting with Alamir, voiced by Sam Neill, and Isilirb, voiced by Jeffrey Rush, who was in the war against Metalbeak's owls, as well as go to a dinner with Otolisa, or Lissa, or I don't know how you say that name, voiced by Abby Cornish. And they train to become a Guardian. And this montage, as well as these scenes, are pretty to look at, but it's hard for me to understand what is happening in this movie and who's who. The Guardians go to attack the bad owls and get ambushed while Isilirb confesses he's been to war before, as he was a Guardian soldier, as director Zack Snyder does a bad job at telling the story, in my opinion. The other Guardians find Eglantine is not doing well, no thanks to Clud and Soren staying aside her, and instead of going to battle with the Guardians, she awakens eventually, and the battle led to Isilirb going on a mission that turns out it leads to a trap, as the slow motion was bothering me, as director Zack Snyder does it repeatedly in 300, Watchmen, and some of the DC movies he did that I've already reviewed before, as it's getting to the point it's really annoying the daylights out of me. Soren joins in on the battle and tries to free the Guardians, with Twilight and Digger getting them free against the bats. And why are there bats in this movie, I wonder? I don't know. And we find out before Alamir's death but he's a traitor, and the script is all over the place. Soren flies fire, but doesn't burn himself in any way, which did feel a little unrealistic, and gets something on fire in order to free the Guardians, and as it turns out it worked, but the battle isn't over yet as the Guardians fight off against the bats, while Isilirb telling Soren to stay with his friends while they fight with bad owls, as they deliberately disobey him and fight for their lives, as Soren sees Clud, and Clud fights Soren, and eventually Soren fights back, and Clud breaks his wing and falls to his death, and while Isilirb fights with Metalbeak and Nira, as Soren comes in to save his teacher and fights with Metalbeak, and Metalbeak takes a stab by Soren, and the bad owls fall back to a sequel that will never happen, by the way, as Soren, the Guardians, and the others fly away to the sunrise to return as heroes and return to their families, and Soren becomes one of the Guardians, as he tells the Guardians of young owls the stories he grew up with as a young owl himself, and flies away with Isilirb as well as his friends. And the climax was disappointingly confusing, while the animation is pretty to watch, but at the end of the day, I just don't care for this movie, and I'll get to my rating and tell you why. I'll give this movie a 4.1 out of 10. The writing is bad, the acting is terrible, and the plot is hard to follow, as I had a very hard time knowing which character is who, as the movie does a bad job at telling the audience who these characters are. I also had a hard time understanding the plot, as director Zack Snyder does a bad job at telling it, as it gave me a hard time understanding what it's all about, and as the animation is stunning to see on screen, I also had a hard time following this movie from the first to the last scene, as the animation, like I said, is pretty to look at, but at the end of the day, I don't really care for this movie, as this is unfortunately a mild non-recommendation for this movie. I wish it was better. So I'll be back next time with Sucker Punch, and thank you guys for joining me, and until then, knock knock, who's there? Owls. Owls who? It's funny.